Caleb Turner had lived alone for so long that silence had become part of his daily life. It followed him from the moment he woke up to the moment he lay down at night. His small cabin stood at the edge of a quiet mountain settlement, surrounded by tall pine trees that whispered in the wind. The place was peaceful. But sometimes, peace can feel too large when a man has no one to share it with. In the early mornings, Caleb would stand on his porch with a cup of warm tea in his hands, watching the sun rise slowly over the hills. He liked the way the light touched the valley, the way the birds began their songs, and the way the air felt fresh and new. But every morning, after only a few minutes, the same thought returned. He wished someone else could stand beside him and see it too. Caleb wasn't a man who spoke much. But when he did, people listened. The folks in town respected him. They said he was steady, hardworking, and honest, qualities that made him a good neighbor, but also made his loneliness more noticeable. After his first wife passed away years earlier, he had tried to fill his life with work. But work could only keep a man busy, not whole. One cold evening, while sitting by his fireplace, Caleb looked around his quiet home and felt an emptiness he could no longer ignore. The rooms were clean, but silent. The table had one chair too many. The bed felt too wide. He wanted warmth again, not just from a fire, but from laughter, conversation, and the feeling of being part of something. That night, he made a decision he had been thinking about for months. He would write to a mail-order bride agency. It wasn't an unusual thing in his time. Many men who lived far from towns or cities wrote letters hoping to find companionship. Caleb hoped for the same. Not just a partner in chores, but a partner in life. He wrote a long, thoughtful letter explaining who he was and what he hoped for. His words were simple, like the life he lived, but honest. A few weeks later, he received a reply from a woman named Anna. Her letter was warm, gentle, and full of hope. She wrote about her dreams of a quiet life, a small home, and someone who cared for her. Caleb read her letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in a small wooden box by his bedside. More letters followed. Caleb began to look forward to them like one looks forward to spring after winter. He would walk to the little post office in town with a tiny spark in his step, and the postmaster would smile knowingly when he handed over an envelope with Anna's handwriting. Caleb kept every letter, reading them on slow evenings and feeling a soft comfort grow inside him. In her last letter, Anna wrote that she was ready to travel and join him. She told him the day she would arrive at the station and how much she looked forward to meeting him. Caleb read that letter 5 times, each time feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. It had been so long since he felt this kind of hope. He began preparing his home with more care than he had shown in years. He scrubbed the floors until they looked almost new. He dusted every shelf, washed the curtains, and even polished the old wooden table. He cleared out a small room beside his own, thinking one day it might be useful. Not right away, but someday. Maybe Anna would want a garden, he thought. Maybe she would want a small stove for baking. Maybe she would bring her own ideas. And he looked forward to that most of all. Caleb even practiced how he would greet her. It felt a little silly, but he wanted everything to be right. He stood in front of his mirror, smoothing his hair and trying out different smiles. He wanted to look welcoming but not too eager, calm but not cold. He imagined what she might look like. He didn't know for sure, but in his mind, she had kind eyes. Kind eyes felt important. As the day of her arrival approached, word began to spread through town. People were curious. Some teased him kindly. Others congratulated him. And a few older ladies offered advice on how to keep a wife happy. Caleb listened politely, but he kept most of his excitement quietly inside. He wanted the moment to be special, private, and real. The night before she was due to arrive, Caleb barely slept. He lay awake thinking about the life he hoped to build, simple, calm, and filled with shared days, instead of lonely ones. He wondered what Anna would think of the mountains, of his small cabin, of him. He hoped she would feel safe, welcomed, and wanted. When morning finally came, Caleb rose early. He washed, shaved, and put on his cleanest shirt. It wasn't new, but it was neatly pressed. He cooked a small meal, but was too excited to eat much of it. After checking himself in the mirror one last time, he saddled his horse and began the ride into town. The path to the station was long and winding, but Caleb knew every curve of it. The trees along the road seemed brighter, the breeze lighter. Even the horse seemed to sense that something important was happening. Caleb reached the station early. He stood near the platform, his hat in his hands, shifting his weight now and then. People walked past him, some nodding, some smiling, but Caleb hardly noticed. He kept looking down the road where the coach would appear. Every sound made his heart jump a little. Minutes passed, then longer. He took a breath, waiting. Finally, he heard the distant sound of wheels on gravel and the soft jingle of harness bells. Caleb straightened quickly, feeling his heart lift. This was the moment. After all the letters, all the hopes, and all the lonely years, he was finally going to meet her. The wagon drew closer, but as it approached, something felt unusual. The horse pulling it was thin, the wagon small and worn. It didn't look like the kind of vehicle someone would use to travel across states. Caleb felt confusion. Not worry, just a gentle question rising in his chest. Maybe she had caught another ride? Maybe a kind family had brought her. He stepped forward, watching carefully. As the wagon came to a stop, he saw a young teenage boy holding the reins. He looked tired, dusty, and far too serious for his age. Caleb's heart sank with uncertainty. Where was Anna? Before he could ask, the boy looked at him with a mixture of worry and hope. Then the rest of the wagon came into view. 7 children, all thin and quiet, sat close together like a flock of small birds seeking warmth. Their eyes were wide, curious, and tired. The oldest girl held a folded piece of paper in her hands. She clutched it tightly, as if it were the last bit of strength she had left. She looked at Caleb, and then at the letter again. "Are you Mr. Caleb Turner?" she asked softly. Caleb felt the world shift just a little. Not in a painful way, but in a way that told him his life was about to change in a direction he had never imagined. He nodded slowly. The girl stepped down from the wagon, walked toward him, and held out the letter. Her hands were trembling. Caleb took it gently, already feeling something heavy settle in his chest. He recognized Anna's handwriting even before he opened it. Everything he thought this day would be suddenly felt far away. And as he looked from the letter to the 7 quiet, hungry children before him, Caleb understood only one thing with complete clarity. Nothing about this day would go the way he had planned. Caleb stood there for a moment, the letter trembling a little in his hand. The world around him seemed unusually quiet, as if even the wind had paused to watch what would happen next. The 7 children waited near the wagon, unsure, tired, and holding on to each other for comfort. Caleb felt their eyes on him, full of questions they were too afraid to ask. He carefully unfolded the letter. Anna's familiar handwriting reached out to him from the page, but the words felt heavier than anything she had written before. She told him that she had fallen ill, suddenly. There was no long warning, no chance to prepare. She knew she might not survive, and in her last days, her biggest worry was her children. She wrote that she trusted him more than anyone she had ever met through letters. She believed he was a good man, a man who would not turn them away. She asked him, with the last of her strength, to take care of them, if they reached him safely. By the time Caleb reached the end of the letter, his heart felt full and tight all at once. He had never met Anna face to face, Yet her voice in the letter felt close, warm, and sincere. She had believed in him, enough to send the only precious things she had left her 7 children. He looked up slowly at them. The youngest, a small boy, with a soft round face, held a blanket up to his chin, watching Caleb with wide eyes. The oldest girl, the one who had handed him the letter, stood straight, though Caleb could see how tired her legs were. The teenage boy who had driven the wagon looked unsure whether to step down or stay where he was. Caleb folded the letter gently, almost reverently, and placed it inside his coat pocket. He cleared his throat softly. "You must be hungry," he said gently. The children looked at each other, almost afraid to answer. Finally, the oldest girl gave a small nod. "We haven't eaten much," she whispered. The road was long. Of course it was long. Anna had lived far away, and for these children to make such a journey, Caleb couldn't imagine the courage it must have taken, or the fear they must have carried with them. "Come," Caleb said, trying to keep his voice steady and kind. "Let's get you all to my home. It's not far." The children exchanged glances again, unsure but hopeful. The teenage boy helped the younger ones climb down carefully from the wagon. Caleb walked forward to lift the smallest child, who clung to him immediately, arms around his neck. Caleb wasn't used to holding children, but something about the little boy's trust settled his nerves. He held him securely. "What's your name?" Caleb asked softly. The boy murmured something against his shoulder. Caleb couldn't fully hear it, but he smiled anyway and gave the child a light, comforting pat. The oldest girl stepped closer. "I'm Maria," she said. Her voice was tired but gentle. "This is Joshua, Daniel, Ruth, Claire, Lily, and the baby is Thomas." Caleb nodded, taking in each name carefully, as if accepting a gift. "Well," he said with a soft breath, "let's go home." They began the slow walk toward Caleb's cabin. He led the horse with one hand and carried little Thomas with the other. The children walked close together, quiet and unsure, but with each step they seemed a little less afraid. The sound of their feet on the dirt road replaced the earlier silence, and Caleb could feel the weight of responsibility settle deeper inside him. He hadn't planned any of this. His heart felt both overwhelmed and strangely certain, as if some part of him knew that this moment was meant to be. As the cabin came into view, Caleb wondered what the children would think of it. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was warm and safe. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney, and the small vegetable garden behind the cabin looked peaceful in the afternoon light. When they reached the porch, the children hesitated again. They looked at the home as if it were a dream they weren't sure they were allowed to enter. Caleb pushed the door open wide. "Come in," he said softly. "You're welcome here." The children stepped inside slowly. Their eyes moved around the room with quiet wonder. The wooden floors were clean. The fireplace glowed gently, and the simple furniture made the cabin feel cozy. Caleb watched their reactions carefully, hoping they could feel a sense of comfort. He placed little Thomas on a chair and went to the kitchen area. "I'll make something warm to eat," he said. "Sit wherever you like." The children didn't say much at first. They whispered quietly among themselves while Caleb prepared a simple meal. Warm soup, fresh bread, and some fruit he had saved. It wasn't a feast, but it was more than the children had seen in a while. When Caleb set the food on the table, the children stared at it with wide eyes. "Go ahead," Caleb said. They began to eat, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Caleb watched them closely, making sure they didn't feel rushed or judged. Something inside him softened as he watched them. These weren't just children, they were children who had come a long way, carrying fears too big for their small shoulders. After the meal, Caleb helped them settle in. He gave them blankets, showed them where they could sleep, and made sure the fire was warm enough. The cabin wasn't meant for 8 people, but he arranged things as best as he could. He gave them his own bed, and planned to sleep near the fireplace. Maria tried to protest. "You shouldn't sleep on the floor," she said quietly. Caleb smiled. "It's all right. You all need the bed more than I do." Maria looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were filled not only with gratitude but also with the heavy weight of responsibility she had carried for too long. As evening settled in, the children grew sleepy. The younger ones curled up under the blankets, some holding on to each other. Joshua stayed awake a little longer, helping Caleb tidy up and put away the dishes. "You didn't have to take us in," Joshua said softly. His voice was polite, but behind it was a fear he tried to hide. Caleb placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Your mother trusted me," he said. "And I'm glad she did." The boy nodded, not saying anything more. But Caleb saw his shoulders relax slightly for the first time since they arrived. When the cabin finally grew quiet, Caleb sat near the fire with the letter in his hands again. The glow of the flames made the handwriting seem warm. Anna had believed he could protect them. She had believed he could give them a home. Caleb felt the truth settle deep inside him. He would not disappoint her. He would not let these children feel alone or unwanted ever again. He looked over at the sleeping faces, the soft breathing, the peaceful expressions that hadn't been there earlier. Something gentle and unexpected filled his chest. It wasn't the life he had prepared for, but it was a life he suddenly felt called to embrace. He whispered quietly into the warm room, as if Anna could hear him. "I'll take care of them. I promise." And though the night was silent outside, inside the cabin something new had begun, something fragile but full of hope. The children had come seeking safety, and Caleb Turner had opened his door not just to them, but to a future he never imagined. The morning after the children arrived, Caleb woke earlier than usual. The sky outside the cabin window was a soft gray, and dawn had not yet touched the mountaintops. For a moment, as he stretched and sat up from his spot near the fireplace, he almost forgot the events of the previous day. Then he heard the quiet breathing of 7 sleeping children, and everything returned to him. The room was peaceful. The children lay huddled together, wrapped in blankets he had arranged the night before. Some slept curled up like kittens, while others sprawled softly across the bed. Maria had the baby's arm tucked gently under her own, as if she had fallen asleep in the middle of watching over him. Caleb smiled at the sight. Even in rest, she carried a sense of responsibility far beyond her years. He stood slowly so he wouldn't wake them, then stepped quietly into the kitchen corner to warm some water. While the water heated, he prepared a simple breakfast warm porridge with a little honey. It wasn't fancy, but it would fill their stomachs and give them strength. As he stirred the pot, he felt something unusual in his chest. A sense of purpose, full and steady. When the smell of warm porridge drifted across the room, the children began to stir. One by one, they lifted their heads, blinking sleepily. Little Thomas rubbed his eyes with tiny fists and looked around in confusion before remembering where he was. When he saw Caleb, his face softened with relief. Maria sat up next, brushing hair from her face. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning," Caleb replied. "Breakfast will be ready soon." The children gathered around the table, some still wrapped in blankets. Joshua helped the younger ones sit down. Ruth held Lily's hand, making sure she didn't slip from the chair. Claire, shy and quiet, waited patiently until Caleb placed a bowl in front of her. There was no talking at first, just the quiet sounds of spoons and soft breaths. But slowly, the comfort of warm food and safety opened the door for conversation. "This is good," Joshua said softly after a while. His eyes met Caleb's, shy, but sincere. "I'm glad," Caleb replied. "We'll have more later." Maria watched him carefully. "You're very kind, Mr. Turner. Just Caleb is fine," he said. "You don't need to be formal." Maria nodded, and something warm flickered in her eyes, though she still carried a hint of worry. A girl who had been caring for 6 siblings could not simply relax overnight. After breakfast, Caleb showed the children around the cabin and the land outside. The mountain air was fresh, and the morning sun painted everything with golden light. The children followed closely, their expressions changing from cautious to curious. "This is my small garden," Caleb said, pointing to the neat rows of vegetables. "And that shed over there is where I keep tools." Joshua's eyes brightened a little. "Do you grow all your food?" "Most of it," Caleb said. "But the town isn't far if we need supplies." Joshua nodded thoughtfully. Caleb could see the boy's mind working, trying to understand how this new life would look. The children moved toward the edge of the yard where wildflowers grew. Little Lily bent down to touch a purple blossom, her face glowing with gentle wonder. Claire found a smooth stone and held it up proudly to show Maria. Daniel raced across the field, arms wide, laughing with a joy that surprised everyone, including himself. Caleb felt his heart expand. It had been a long time since laughter touched this land. But with the joy came challenges he had not expected. Inside the cabin, things felt different now. 7 children meant noise, questions, accidents, and endless energy. Caleb had lived alone for years, and learning to adjust wasn't easy. Sometimes the children talked all at once. Sometimes they needed help at the same time. Sometimes they grew upset, confused by this new life. When Ruth knocked over a pitcher of water, she froze in fear, eyes wide as if expecting punishment. Caleb quickly reassured her. "It's all right," he said gently, wiping the water with a cloth. "It happens. Accidents are part of life." Ruth looked surprised at his calm tone. She slowly relaxed. Another time, Claire started crying quietly when she couldn't find her little wooden doll. Caleb knelt down and helped search the cabin until they found it under a blanket. Claire hugged the doll close and whispered, "Thank you," with trembling voice. The moment that touched Caleb most happened that afternoon. Little Thomas walked over and tugged at his shirt. When Caleb bent down, Thomas lifted his arms, asking to be held. Caleb carried him, feeling the small boy rest his head against his shoulder as if he had known him forever. Every small gesture reminded Caleb that these children had been through more than he could imagine. They weren't just tired physically, they were tired in their hearts. They had lost a mother, traveled a long distance, and entered the home of a man they had never met. Trust would grow slowly, like seeds that needed gentle soil. Joshua, the oldest boy, was the hardest to understand at first. He carried himself like someone older than his years. He helped without being asked, watched over the others, and tried to take every burden onto himself. After lunch, Caleb found him chopping wood behind the cabin. "You don't have to work right away," Caleb said kindly. "You should rest." Joshua shook his head. "I'm used to helping. I don't like sitting still." "You've done a lot for your siblings," Caleb said. "You must be tired." The boy paused, then said quietly, "I just want them to be all right." Caleb placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "They will be. And you will be too." Joshua looked down, unsure how to accept kindness, but the words seemed to lighten him just a little. Caleb saw the boy's struggle clearly, the desire to protect, the fear of failing, the pressure he carried alone. Caleb wished he could take all that weight from him, piece by piece. As the day went on, Caleb found small ways to give the children comfort. He taught them how to wash their hands in the outdoor basin. He showed them how to feed the chickens, which brought delighted giggles from the youngest ones. He let them help collect eggs, and Lily clapped her hands when she found a warm brown egg tucked in hay. Later in the afternoon, Maria approached him while the children played. She stood quietly beside him, hands clasped nervously. "Thank you," she said softly. "For all of this. For us." Caleb smiled gently. "You're welcome here, Maria." She hesitated before speaking again. "I was scared yesterday. When we arrived, I thought maybe you would not want us. And well, I understand why you felt that way," Caleb said. But I'm glad you came." Maria's eyes grew shiny with emotion. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. As evening neared, Caleb prepared dinner with the children's help. The kitchen was filled with cheerful sounds, Daniel humming, Ruth asking questions, Claire holding up vegetables proudly, and Thomas toddling around with tiny footsteps. The air smelled of warm bread and herbs. After they finished eating, Caleb lit the oil lamp. The golden light filled the cabin with a cozy glow. He read a simple story out loud, while the children gathered around him. Some listened with wide eyes, others leaned sleepily against pillows. By the time the story ended, several of them had drifted off. Joshua carried Daniel to the bed. Maria lifted Lily gently. Caleb picked up Thomas, who fell asleep against his shoulder, without a sound. When the room grew quiet again, Caleb looked at the sleeping children with a mix of tenderness and awe. This cabin, once filled with silence, now felt alive. Where loneliness once echoed, small breaths and gentle dreams now filled the space. He realized something clearly. These children were not just guests. They were becoming part of him, part of his heart, part of his daily rhythm, part of the future he had never expected. Caleb sat near the fire for a moment, feeling grateful. He looked at the letter in his pocket, thinking of Anna, the woman he had never met yet felt connected to. "You did well," he whispered softly to the memory of her. "Your children are safe. They'll be cared for." And there, in that warm cabin filled with sleeping children, Caleb Turner understood that he had not just been given a responsibility, he had been given a second chance at family, at purpose, at love. The first signs of winter arrived quietly, almost politely, as if the season wanted to give Caleb and the children time to prepare. The mornings grew colder, and thin layers of frost sparkled on the fields behind the cabin. The air felt crisp and sharp, and the sun took longer each day to rise above the mountains. Caleb knew this winter would be different from every winter he had lived through before. He wasn't alone anymore. 7 children depended on him now. Children who needed warmth, food, and comfort. Caleb began working earlier than usual, waking before dawn to chop extra firewood. His breath formed clouds in the chilly air as he swung the axe into thick logs. Joshua soon joined him, rubbing sleep from his eyes but eager to help. Caleb tried to send him back inside to rest, but Joshua shook his head stubbornly. "I can help," he said. Caleb understood the boy's determination. Joshua didn't want to feel like a burden. He wanted to carry his share. So Caleb handed him smaller, lighter pieces to stack by the shed. "Take your time," Caleb said gently. "There's no hurry." Joshua nodded, grateful for the trust. Inside the cabin, Maria helped the younger ones with simple tasks. She guided Ruth and Claire to fold blankets, while Lily set the spoons on the table for breakfast. Little Thomas followed Maria closely, hanging to her skirt with tiny hands. Maria worked quietly, but Caleb noticed how she watched the weather through the window. Her eyes filled with quiet worry. She had learned too young what it meant to be responsible. As the days grew shorter, Caleb worked double, repairing loose shingles on the roof, patching small gaps in the cabin walls, and making sure the fireplace drew heat well. He wanted the children to feel safe, warm, and protected. They had faced enough fear in life. By late afternoon each day, the sky turned a soft shade of silver. The children helped as much as they could. Daniel gathered dry leaves for kindling. Claire held a basket of potatoes while Caleb sorted through them. Ruth checked the hens for eggs. It became a routine, a rhythm of life they all shared. One morning, the first snowflakes fell, drifting down like little feathers. The children ran outside in excitement, holding out their hands and watching the flakes melt on their warm palms. Lily giggled, hopping in circles. Thomas looked up in amazement, his mouth forming a tiny O of wonder. "It's so soft," Claire exclaimed. Caleb stood on the porch, watching them with a smile. He hadn't seen joy like this around his home in years. It warmed him, in a way the fire never could. But along with the joy came new challenges. Snow covered the paths, making it harder to travel. The cold grew deeper each day. Food supplies needed careful planning. Caleb had prepared, but winter had a way of testing even the most prepared hearts. For the first time since their arrival, the children experienced days when they couldn't run outside or explore the fields. They grew restless, turning the cabin into a world of small activities. Maria taught them songs their mother used to sing. Ruth and Claire braided pieces of yarn into tiny crafts. Daniel tried to build little figures out of twigs he had collected earlier in the season. Joshua, however, struggled the most. He paced often, staring out the window as if checking the weather's mood. He felt responsible for his siblings' safety, and the heavy snow made him uneasy. One afternoon, Caleb found him standing alone outside, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "You're worried," Caleb said gently. Joshua didn't deny it. "I just want them to be okay. This is all new." Caleb nodded. "You're not alone in this. We're a team now." Joshua looked up, meeting Caleb's calm eyes. Slowly, the boy nodded. It was a small but important moment, accepting that he didn't have to carry everything by himself anymore. But winter was not finished with them. One evening, as the wind howled softly through the trees, little Thomas began to feel unwell. He curled against Caleb's chest, resting his head with unusual quietness. His cheeks were warm, and his eyes looked tired. Maria noticed immediately and knelt beside them. "He doesn't look well," she whispered. Caleb touched Thomas's forehead gently. The warmth worried him, but he kept his expression calm. "He just needs rest," he said, in a soothing voice. They wrapped the little boy in blankets and kept him close to the fire. Maria fetched a cool cloth and pressed it to his forehead. Joshua sat nearby, worry etched across his face. "Will he be all right?" Joshua asked quietly. "Yes," Caleb said, though inside he felt a flicker of fear. "He just needs warmth, water, and rest." The cabin grew quieter that night. The other children watched in silence. Helping in small ways, Ruth brought more blankets. Claire held the water cup ready. Lily sat beside Maria, leaning her head on her arm. They had learned to support one another in their own gentle ways. Caleb stayed awake long after the children fell asleep. He kept the fire burning bright and checked Thomas often, grateful each time the boy's breathing remained soft and steady. The sense of responsibility felt heavy but meaningful. He wasn't just caring for 7 children. He was caring for 7 hearts that had already lost so much. By morning, Thomas looked better. His cheeks still held a little color, but his eyes were brighter, and he reached up for Caleb with tiny hands. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Maria gave a relieved smile. "He's getting stronger." Caleb nodded. "Yes. He just needed care." Even Joshua allowed himself a small smile, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. The scare passed, but it reminded Caleb how fragile life could feel in winter. He became even more careful. He made sure the children always had warm clothes, enough blankets, and meals that filled their bellies. He checked the roof after every snowfall, reinforced the windows, and stored extra wood near the door. And something changed in the community as well. When Caleb traveled into town for supplies, people noticed he wasn't alone anymore. They saw the children bundled in coats, holding onto the wagon. At first, there were whispers, curious looks, and quiet questions. But soon, something else happened. Kindness began to bloom. Mrs. Hodges from the bakery handed Caleb a loaf of warm bread for the little ones. The tailor gave Maria a pair of knitted mittens. The storekeeper offered extra blankets at a lower price. The town, once simply a place Caleb visited, now began to feel like a village that cared. One afternoon, when snow pressed softly against the windows, something unexpected happened in the cabin. While the younger children played quietly with wooden blocks near the fire, Joshua approached Caleb. His hands were in his pockets, and he looked nervous, as if he had practiced what he wanted to say. "You know," Joshua began, "the little ones. They're calling this place home." His voice was soft but steady. Caleb felt his chest warm. "That makes me happy." Joshua hesitated, then added more quietly, "The other day, Thomas called you Pa." Caleb paused. The word felt like a gentle spark, surprising but warm. He swallowed softly. "Did he?" Caleb asked, his voice quiet. Joshua nodded. "He didn't mean anything wrong. He just, I think, he feels safe." Caleb placed a hand on Joshua's shoulder. "It didn't upset me. It means a lot, actually." Joshua looked relieved. But more than that, he looked hopeful. As the storm outside softened, Caleb realized something important. A family wasn't something you always planned. Sometimes, it arrived at your door in ways you didn't expect. Sometimes it came in the form of 7 children seeking warmth, safety, and love. The cabin, once a quiet shelter, had become a place filled with life. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside, there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from the connection growing stronger each day. That night, as Caleb tucked the children into bed and listened to their soft breaths, he felt a steady certainty settle deep in his heart. No matter how long the winter lasted, they would face it together not as strangers, but as a family being built with care, hope, and love. Spring came slowly, almost shyly, as if it wanted to make sure winter had truly left before showing its bright face. The first sign was the soft drip of melting snow from the cabin roof. Next came the thin blades of grass pushing through the cold ground, reaching for sunlight. And finally, tiny flowers began to appear at the edge of the fields, their colors like little celebrations of life. For Caleb and the children, spring felt like a fresh beginning. They had lived through the hardest part of winter together, supporting each other, caring for each other, and growing closer every day. The cabin no longer felt like a quiet place built for one person. It felt like a home, woven together with laughter, shared work, and gentle moments. On the first warm morning of spring, the children ran outside with joy. Lily picked flowers and tried to braid them into a crown. Claire and Ruth chased butterflies near the fence. Daniel raced in wide circles, arms open like he wanted to hug the sun. Little Thomas toddled behind Caleb, his tiny boots leaving small prints in the soft soil. Maria stood near the garden, pulling weeds and checking the earth with careful hands. She seemed more relaxed now, her eyes softer and her smile easier. The winter had been difficult, but it had also shown her that she was no longer carrying the weight of responsibility alone. Caleb had become someone she could trust, someone who cared deeply for her and her brothers and sisters. Joshua helped Caleb repair the fence that had been damaged by heavy snow. As they worked side by side, Joshua's steps looked stronger and his eyes brighter. He no longer wore the constant expression of worry he had carried when they first arrived. He was still protective of his siblings, but now he trusted the world a little more and trusted Caleb a lot more. "You've grown this winter," Caleb said gently as he hammered a nail into the wood. Joshua wiped his forehead and smiled. "I feel different," he admitted. "I feel lighter." "That's good," Caleb said. "You've done more than most grown men would do." Joshua looked down shyly but with pride. "Thank you," he whispered. The days grew longer, and the cabin filled with more warmth. The children began helping Caleb plant seeds in the garden. They learned how to dig small holes, drop the seeds in gently, and cover them with soft earth. Caleb taught them how to water the soil carefully. Not too much, and not too little. "This garden will feed us in summer," Caleb explained, "and you all helped make it grow." The children beamed, excited at the idea that they were helping build something important. As the weeks passed, the trees grew green again. Birds returned, singing cheerful songs early each morning. The warm breeze carried the smell of fresh grass and blooming flowers. The world felt alive in every direction. But something else grew during those days, something invisible but powerful. It was the sense that Caleb and the children were no longer simply sharing space. They were becoming a family, not by blood, but by choice, care, and love. One evening, after a long day of planting, Joshua approached Caleb with a thoughtful expression. "Are we going to stay here forever?" he asked quietly. Caleb paused, watching the boy's face. "Do you want to?" Joshua looked toward the cabin, where Maria was rocking Thomas gently, and the younger ones were drawing pictures in the dirt with sticks. "Yes," he said simply. "It feels like home." Caleb felt his heart swell. "It feels like home to me too." Joshua hesitated, then continued more softly. Do we belong here?" Caleb understood the real question behind those words. He knelt, so he could look Joshua eye to eye. "You belong here," he said firmly. Joshua swallowed, and emotion filled his eyes. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. It was the answer he had hoped for, but had been afraid to ask. Later that night, Caleb sat by the fire with the letter Anna had written. He read it quietly, feeling her presence in the words. She had trusted him to care for her children, and he had done everything he could to honor that trust. But now, he wanted to do more than care for them. He wanted to give them a future with protection, stability, and legal security. The next morning, Caleb hitched the horse to the wagon and called the children together. "We're going to town," he said with a smile. The children climbed in excitedly, happy for an outing. They passed the blooming trees and green fields along the road. When they reached the town, Caleb guided them toward the courthouse. Maria looked up at him. "Why are we here?" "You'll see," Caleb said gently. Inside, Caleb spoke with the judge, while the children sat on a bench nearby. They swung their feet, whispered to each other, and tried to understand what was happening. After a few minutes, the judge called them forward. He was an older man with a kind face. He looked at the children, then at Caleb. "These children," the judge said, "do you want to take full responsibility for them? For their care, safety, and future?" Caleb answered without hesitation. "Yes, I want to adopt all 7 of them. I want them to be my family." The children froze. Maria's eyes widened. Joshua stared at Caleb in disbelief. Even little Lily looked puzzled for a moment. The judge nodded, satisfied. "If the children agree, we can sign the papers today." Maria stepped forward first. She looked at Caleb, with tears beginning to shine in her eyes. "Do you really want us?" she asked softly. Caleb's voice was warm and steady. "More than anything." Maria nodded, wiping her cheeks. Joshua was next. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Yes, I want this." Each of the younger children followed, some nodding shyly, some hugging Caleb around the waist before answering. Little Thomas didn't understand the words, but when asked if he wanted to stay with Caleb, he held out his hands to be carried. That was answer enough. The judge smiled warmly and signed the papers. "Congratulations," he said. "You are now a family." The children burst into quiet joy. Maria hugged Caleb tightly. Joshua stood beside him proudly. Ruth, Claire, Daniel, and Lily held hands and jumped in place. Thomas clapped his hands, happy because everyone else was happy. On the wagon ride home, the mood was bright and full of laughter. The children talked about the future, about birthdays, about where to plant more flowers, and about the rooms in the cabin they wanted to decorate. Caleb listened with a full heart, knowing that the path ahead would not always be easy, but it would always be worth it. Back at the cabin, the evening sunlight turned everything golden. The garden glowed. The fields shimmered. The cabin looked warm and inviting. Caleb stood on the porch, watching the children run across the yard with carefree joy. Maria picked wildflowers. Claire guided Lily around the garden. Ruth and Daniel chased each other, their laughter ringing through the air. Joshua walked slowly with Thomas on his shoulders, both of them smiling. Caleb felt something settle inside him, a deep, peaceful happiness. He thought of Anna, imagining her smiling with relief, knowing her children were safe and loved. He whispered quietly into the gentle breeze, "Thank you for trusting me." The children ran toward him, calling his name, asking him to play, to help, to join their games. Caleb stepped down from the porch, his heart full. He never married the woman he waited for, but her children had given him something even greater. They had given him a family. A true, warm, beautiful family, built not by chance, but by love.